It's Thursday, August 3rd. I'm Matt Harmon. Welcome to the Yahoo Fantasy Football Show presented by Toyota. It's a hell of a day to talk ball, and joining me to do just that is the one and only, the absolutely fantastic Andy Behrens. Andy, what's going on, buddy?
I'm doing well. I think maybe a couple weeks ago I said that I was really looking forward to like viral clip season from training camp, and I'm sick of it now. I've seen enough overreactions one way or the other to viral training camp clips that I remembered that it's actually hell.
I pretty much had this exact same rant on the podcast yesterday. So you and I are on the same page. I, and Rich Rebar. That's not how you're supposed to say that, but we're all on the same page. I feel like a lot of people are probably on the same page. Well, hey, great news, Andy. As people are listening to this today, Thursday, August 3rd, there's a damn game tonight. The Hall of Fame wild. Game. Which is, for one, just mind-blowing that it came up so quickly. But, we're now, I guess, just 1 year out from the Josh Jacobs Hall of Fame game fiasco. I can't wait to see what the overreaction is to this Hall of Fame game and how much it will top, training camp highlight season.
Yeah, nothing's going to beat so many lessons to be learned from the Josh Jacobs situation last year. I was just going to say the 1 year anniversary of the biggest mistake of your fantasy year. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, the good news is we'll probably get a heavy dose of Zach Wilson. So we got that to look forward to here on Thursday night. On this show, we're not going to be previewing the Hall of Fame game. We are continuing rankings week here in the first full week of August. Andy and I are going to decide the 5 best ADPs to exploit and the 5 worst ADPs to avoid in drafts right now. We're going to do that in a little bit, but first, we do have some news to get to, starting off with a big one here. ESPN's Adam Schefter reports that Cooper Kupp is going to be out for, quote, a few weeks. Kupp obviously missed a ton of the 2022 season with a high ankle sprain. He was helped off the field during practice on Thursday. The team is going to be cautious, of course, with their top player, according to Schefter. We're not going to see Cooper Kupp in the preseason. A spoiler alert, we weren't going to see Cooper Kupp in the preseason anyways. The Rams never play their guys in the preseason. But I've definitely seen a few people reacting heavily to this, Andy. Kupp was on a tear last year prior to that high ankle sprain. And it's hard to not, we did the projections show yesterday. It's hard not to project Cooper Kupp for like 170 targets this year with the complexion of that Rams roster. How much is this preseason injury on top of the injury from last year causing you to maybe pause on his ADP at this point?
It's not nothing, right? It's clearly not a worst case scenario just yet. And it's not a catastrophic injury by any means. It doesn't, who knows, like when we get initial reports on things like this, but it doesn't seem like it's something that should be super value affecting. If you want to elevate Tyreek Hill above Cooper Kupp, that's fine, right? They're both extraordinary players. It's not gonna cause me to like bump him significantly in my first round, anything like that. But it is a reminder that, injuries have been part of the story with Cooper Kupp before, that he's not this isn't a 24-year-old, 25-year-old player here. It is a concern. And it's definitely something that we're probably going to have to, like, a couple of weeks from now, I am going to want to hear that, Cooper Kupp is back to being 90%, close to 100% in individual work. We don't have to worry about the rapport that he has with his quarterback. It's perfect. Yeah. And you're right. He is a candidate to see 160, 170 targets this season. It should happen, assuming full health. But like, this doesn't mean that he's played his one injury card and now he's free for the rest of the year. It's a worry.
Yep, that's not how it works. It would be great if that's how it worked, but it's not. So I assume that you're not going to tell me that any of the like first 5 to 6 picks off the board right now are in your worst ADP section. I'm going to go ahead and assume that is the case, that you're not going to sit here and bang on Christian McCaffrey, and the boys up top. So right now, according to consensus ADP, the first 6 players off the board are Justin Jefferson, Christian McCaffrey, Austin Eckler, Jamar Chase, Travis Kelce, Cooper Kupp. I mentioned on yesterday's show that I just finished my projections. And after doing those, Andy, I will admit, like, I have been a hard and fast, like Jamar Chase is wide receiver 2 this year. He could have the Justin Jefferson season from last year this year. It's also worth mentioning that his quarterback right now is banged up. That's something to consider when you're ranking these players. After doing projections, I was like, man, I might have Cooper Kupp as my wide receiver 2. Now I'm not going to do that, right? Like this actually spares me from flip-flopping there, the 2 and 3 guys. And really, though, I still think even with the injury risk, like once you get, now I'm not saying these guys are bad picks or anything, but the other guys with top 12 ADP, Bijan Robinson, Tyreek Hill, Saquon Barkley, Jonathan Taylor, Nick Chubb, Stephon Diggs, those guys all have at least one relatively significant to mildly significant wart in their profiles as well that you could kind of weigh this Kupp injury against.
Yeah, I can't. There's nothing about this that forces Cooper Kupp outside my top 4 at receiver, right? And there's nothing about this that forces him too far outside like the first half of the first round in fantasy drafts. I guess it could get worse. We could hear in 2 weeks that he's not really showing progress, and then that would make me revisit it. But like, I would be entirely comfortable drafting him in the first round today. Again, I think like the only change I can imagine making is perhaps elevating Tyreek above Kupp. I think that Tyreek, Kupp, Chase, Jefferson, like if you were to tell me that we're finally going to get the first 2,000-yard receiver in the history of the game, it's going to happen this year, I would take those 4 probably over the field. I still think that the number 1 receiver comes from that group.
I think we're on the same page there, and it is a reminder that not only is like just Kupp in general, I'm not talking about like him from a durability perspective, although obviously like you said, injuries have been part of the story. I think of those 4. I mean, I don't know. Obviously, Tyreek's got a quarterback that's, a health risk too. There's just a lot of fragility around Cooper Kupp from his own perspective, from the team perspective. Like we saw last year, they started slow and then they just started shutting guys down left and right. And obviously Matthew Stafford is chief among them. So there is some risk there. This is a reminder of that, but I agree. I'm not really moving him too far out of my first 6-7 picks right now at this point. Next thing here, and this one definitely seems pretty minor. Jaguars head coach Doug Peterson said Calvin Ridley is dealing with a toe injury. He actually got in some limited work today. It seems like it's not a big deal. That's great to hear because my God, Andy, I am like I'm gonna rank Calvin Ridley higher than ADP, and I already know that. So I'm happy that this doesn't seem like a big deal.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like a big deal. He's still like active in practice is the important thing. So this isn't, that I don't think we're going to hear later that this is some sort of super severe turf toe issue, anything like that, because he's working in practice right now, like literally within hours of us talking. Like he's got this issue and he's playing through it. He's working through it. So doesn't seem like a huge deal. This is one of the most interesting teams. I don't know. That's kind of an ambiguous term, I guess, but this is one of the most interesting teams and one of the most interesting receiving corps in the NFL. I don't think Trevor Lawrence is going to finish as the QB1 in fantasy. I don't really think he has that ceiling necessarily, but I do think Trevor Lawrence is somebody who can like sneak into the greater MVP conversation, not as a favorite, but like somebody who's like an also ran in the MVP conversation. I think Calvin Ridley is a big part of that. I think his return to fantasy relevance is going to be most welcome and is, again, one of the more interesting storylines from an ascending team. So I'm super interested in him. Again, great news that it doesn't seem like this is anything that should be value affecting in terms of drafts.
I think the season we're looking for Trevor Lawrence is, I probably brought this up before, but Justin Herbert's 2021 season when he was the QB2 in fantasy. He ran for 300 yards. He popped in 3 scores. More notably, though, he threw for 5,000 yards and 38 touchdowns. And I think that's very possible with this cast. That's not going to be the QB1 because Josh Allen that year, there was almost like a 20-30 point gap between those two guys because Josh Allen ran for 700 plus yards and 6 touchdowns. That's just going to be hard for Trevor Lawrence to do, but that's like the peak of a non-pocket sloth, non-pocket statue passing quarterback. That's like the peak of the possible season right there. And I do think that's within the range of outcomes for Trevor Lawrence this year.
Yeah, I will say, like, I know I've talked about this before. Trevor Lawrence can run. They just don't want him doing a lot of it. Like, he's better at that than Justin Herbert. He was great as a runner in college. Like that was a key part of that offense. And some of his best moments were actually on the ground. They just like, that's like a, in case of emergency break glass plan for the Jaguars. It's just not something that they want to do with the most important player in the history of the franchise, right? Like, which I totally get and I totally accept. But if they decided that they wanted Trevor Lawrence to run for 600 yards, he could do it.
Next one up here, The Athletic's Joe Buscaglia reports that James Cook has worked as the Bills' quote far and away top back during training camp. Buscaglia added that Cook seems quote destined for at least over half of the offensive snaps this season if he continues this level of play. Andy, Rich Rebar got my gears turning on James Cook, who I hadn't put a ton of thought into. And again, doing projections, I was like, oh man, James Cook actually kind of pops out pretty well. And then when Rich said yesterday that essentially James Cook is the arbitrage version of Jahmyr Gibbs, who goes much earlier, and the arbitrage version of DeAndre Swift, who actually goes a little bit significantly earlier than Cook as well. That was like, you know what? That's a really good point. Like, is the gap in the range of outcomes that big of a difference between James Cook and like a Jahmyr Gibbs? And there's not a lot of buzz on James Cook really in fantasy, but I don't know, man. He's got me thinking about this, and this report also got me thinking about it as well.
Yeah, I'm actually, and again, I haven't spent a ton of time. I mean, in preparation for this podcast, I spent some time with ADP, but prior to that, it's a little early. Like I'm not looking at ADP in July necessarily, so I haven't spent a ton of time in it, other than like in the drafts that I've participated in. You have to care about it. I'm surprised that DeAndre Swift would be going ahead of James Cook, because James Cook has received it isn't necessarily a ton of fantasy hype until recently, but you can't scroll Twitter without. Sorry, are we calling it Twitter anymore? I don't know. Who
cares?
You can't scroll your thing without seeing a James Cook highlight or reading some James Cook hype. He's been one of the buzziest early stories in camp. I don't think, and they were super honest with us when they actually drafted Cook. Like they described him as sort of a part-timer, maybe a head of a committee, maybe a committee member sort of type, somebody that was going to catch a lot of passes for them. And I still think that's his role, but could he get to 55%, 60% of the snaps? I think that's certainly a possibility. They didn't, I don't think they brought in Damian Harris's depth. I think Harris is going to play. I think they still envision it as sort of a two-man backfield. So I don't really think there's a path for James Cook to be, we talk about this all the time. Most NFL teams are not trying to get their backfield down to one guy. I don't think the Bills are trying to do that. I don't think it is in Cook's best interest long-term to do that. So like, I don't think he can be like an 1,800 scrimmage yard player, but 1,100, 1,200. The other reason that I was thinking about James Cook recently is because I was, doing projections and going through my own ranks. I have him in close proximity to a couple of other second-year running backs. He jumps out to me as an exception from like the RB dead zone a little bit, as a guy that I actually really do want, and he kind of goes in that range. And I think there's an opportunity for him to make a big leap forward. But then I look at some of the other second-year guys in that range. I have him really close to Rachaad White, and I just think like, with James Cook last year, I thought his most unfortunate moments, or the biggest problem with him often, was that he and Josh Allen would almost once a game in a meaningful way, they would be on different pages, right? And I assume that Josh Allen was correct 100% of the time and Cook was always wrong. And like that, but that's correctable. My problem with Rachaad White is that he literally didn't make anybody miss last year. Yeah. And I don't know how correctable his issue is. I know that we can fix what went wrong for James Cook last year.
Yeah. Again, the Cook thing is fascinating because when Damian Harris first signed there, I was like, you know what? I'm going to be probably almost all in on Damian Harris, because I think the Bills need a grind. Like, I think they need a grinder back. And I think they, Brandon Beane's talking about how on the Pat McAfee show that they're going to be like, they're going to use more 2 tight end sets this year. And, I've seen people kind of make the point, they're like, well, that's going to just make them more predictable from a passing game standpoint, but it could make them a little bit better from a run game standpoint. Like if they're beefing up the boxes and stuff like that. But then they sign Latavius Murray, and they have basically the exact same contract. I think Harris can beat out Murray, but at least here in July, well, we're in August now, for God's sakes. But here in August, like before cuts, we're still not sure if that like is going to be a split role or both guys going to make the rosters, one guy going to make the roster. So, and then I also just thought about too, like, well, we're probably all going to get way too excited in fantasy about Damian Harris, who's a 2-down banger, a touchdown threat on a team with a quarterback who's going to take most of the rushing touchdowns himself. And so shouldn't we just be excited about the passing down back? And that is going to be James Cook. And you mentioned there are a lot of guys, and I'm not saying I'm all out on these guys. There's a couple of them that I really like that project for a lot of carries, like a Alexander Madison, a Miles Sanders, a Kenneth Walker, a Damian Pierce, a Cam Akers. And Cook goes after all of those guys, and the margin for error for a guy that's going to catch passes in a good offense is just so much. There's just a much wider margin for error than for those type of backs that go in the quote like running back dead zone.
Yeah, a couple things you said there that I want to piggyback on. Number one, like I get that the Bills are technically going to run a lot of 2 tight end stuff, despite having not done it before. But they are screaming at us that they don't even really consider Kincaid a tight end, right? Like he's going to be a slot guy. He's not like Dalton. Like Dalton Kincaid is not going to do what you think of as traditional tight end stuff. He's going to be a little bit of a fake tight end. He's just going to be like their slot, and so you like fine. They're 2 tight ends. The other thing is like as much conversation as there's been, some of it from Josh Allen about him not running as much or not taking a lot of that goal. Like when you're actually in it and we're calling plays and a game is on the line, Josh Allen is going to do what Josh Allen does, and I fully expect Josh Allen to have at least 7 rushing touchdowns this year.
It's like, we'll see when the bullets start flying. We'll see if you can really, like tame the stallion type of thing with Josh Allen. Mm-hmm. I don't think you can. And by the way, I think that makes the team worse if you dial back like who he is. There are definite moments when they can not, and you made this point about like Justin Fields last year. There were times where it's like, you don't need to have this guy be your designed rusher as much as he is. And I think there are times when they don't need Josh Allen to be their designed between the tackles back, which is what Damian Harris can do. But that role can be really, really valuable for the Buffalo Bills and really not matter that much for fantasy football players. And I think that's sort of the disconnect there. Last point, I think we're both in like kind of consensus here that James Cook might be a guy that I know I'm gonna start bumping up a little bit here, and I think is going to be an appealing pick. But just on the Kincaid thing, I don't know if I fully believe this, but I'm just going to play a little devil's advocate here because, and I'm not saying this because you're infringing on the tight ends are basically wide receivers territory. I'm not getting on my soapbox about that, but Kincaid as their slot receiver, I like how often is the tight end and just big ass guy. Okay. How often is the big ass guy like a better slot receiver than like a pretty solid slot receiver? And again, like I saw Steven Ruiz from the Ringer make this point about the 2019 Philadelphia Eagles, where they were in 12 personnel a ton. It's like, oh, they have Zach Ertz and they have Dallas Goedert. What a matchup problem. But they stunk passing out of 12 personnel. And I thought it was look, and just because one team was bad at it doesn't mean that every team is going to be bad at it. And maybe Dawson Knox and Dalton Kincaid in this version are better than like the version of Zach Ertz at that point. I just think it was an interesting thought exercise to me that usually the 2 tight end stuff and like the tight end split out as the slot receiver is almost always more exciting when we're talking about it in July and in August than it is in September, October, November, and December. Again, I'm not 100% sure if I truly believe all this, but at least worth discussing. Any thoughts?
Yeah, I think to some extent in Buffalo, it's really an indictment of what they were getting from, like McKenzie last year. And they just didn't get the production from the slot, from the guys who were supposed to replace Cole Beasley, right? That they thought they would. I mean, like Mark Andrews has been the slot receiver for the Ravens for a long time. This isn't true of like every tight end. It just happens that a lot of the guys that we focus on in fantasy, they'll be in line like 20% of the time or less. And they are in fact like primary slots for their team, like Travis Kelce is a slot receiver 45% of the time. It's how it goes. But there's a range, right? This isn't every tight end necessarily. Like George Kittle's in line a lot. We could call that a distinct position if we want to. But I don't think, like, I think Kincaid is in for usage that looks almost exactly like a receiver. Ideally, you would just have a straight up, lightning quick, immediate separator in the slot, and not necessarily like a 6'4", 250-pound guy. I totally get that. I agree with that. That does seem ideal. You just want like instant separation from that spot. They didn't get it last year, or when they got it, passes were dropped, and McKenzie was commonly not. Yeah. McKenzie fell down a weird number of times last year. Dropped balls that should not have been dropped.
He's a previous kick returner who'd only been a kick returner that was trying to make the transition to receiver, and I think we can all say it didn't work out.
Did not work out. Yep.
The only thing I'll say just about the Dalton Kincaid stuff is, if he's as good as advertised, if he's even like 80% of Travis Kelce, because Travis Kelce's one of the best TEs to ever play the game. If he's 80% of Travis Kelce, it's fine. We're probably good with him being the slot receiver, right? And I think it's just like if he's 30% of Travis Kelce, if he's like 40% of Travis Kelce, we're probably not having as good a time out of the whole 12 personnel thing.
Yeah, if he's 80% of Travis Kelce, that's like 950 yards, right? that's pretty good
about that. You're feeling pretty good about that. Okay, last thing here before we move on to the 5 best and 5 worst ADPs. Lions head coach Dan Campbell said that Jameson Williams is going to be doused with preseason reps. He's going to play a ton of the preseason. He needs to play. I think he needs the reps. Just real quick, curious your thoughts on Jameson Williams, who I feel like I can't decide if people talk about Jameson Williams way too much or like we don't talk about him at all because he's not going to play, in the first 6 weeks. So I don't know. What are your, I have no idea what to do with Jameson Williams when I'm ranking and projecting. And this kind of goes to the point of rankings and projecting and how they can be a little faulty. Because I'll tell you what, I'm just like, I've never drafted him once. I've never thought about drafting him once. I've never really been tempted by the proposition of drafting him this year. Is that stupid?
Well, no, the suspension sort of leads you to that, right? Because he's just not going to be a part of your team for the first half of the fantasy regular season, which is just, I don't know. Is he a good enough player to wait, all this time for? I don't think so. So I don't have him. It's funny that you can tell yourself any story that you want to based on like little snapshots from camp. Your feed can contain one note saying that he's dropping passes constantly, and then the next note is like, wow, highlight 55-yard touchdown in 7-on-7s. So we know he's capable of sensational moments. We also fighting
teammates. Don't forget that. Forget that.
Yeah. Oh yeah, throwing a punch at a teammate. That's in there too, which I don't know that Dan Campbell doesn't like. But that's in there too. So he's clearly a developmental prospect to some extent. We knew that. Is he? Maybe he's just like suspended George Pickens. I don't know. Maybe that's what he is. I don't know what to do with him. Except I know that I don't have to think about him for the first for over a month of the season. And as a practical matter, like if you draft the guy and you start out 1-3, you are definitely dropping him. Like you're not. Right. You're gonna have to make moves, and you're gonna have to add. You can't. You're going to get a couple weeks into the season. You'll be like, oh, I'm 0-2. I can't worry about these guys that I have stashed for November. Like I gotta win.
Right. And it'd be one thing if it was Amon-Ra St. Brown suspended for 6 weeks and you started 1-3 and you're like, oh man, you know what? I really need that roster spot to add, insert running back who's starting because the guy ahead of him got injured. I really need this roster spot, but it's Amon-Ra St. Brown. When he comes back, he's set it and forget it, 10, 12 targets a game, and he's a star. Jameson Williams might be that guy. I think he's also like, you can't, if you draft Jameson Williams, I just don't think you should draft him, but if you're the one to draft him and you drop him and he goes off in the back half of the year, I don't even feel like you can feel like an idiot either because he's just such an unknown. Like, shoot, you said George Pickens. Let's hope he's George Pickens. Let's hope he's as good as George Pickens, who I have my questions about as a player, but I know what he's good at. I know the things he's good at and where he's going to impact his team in the role he is going to play at a bare minimum if he doesn't improve a lick from his rookie season, which is also possible. But James Williams, buddy, I have no idea.
Yeah, the better name for me to have thrown out might have been like a Will Fuller from a few years ago, right? I was just thinking of Pickens as a guy whose like highlights are of the highest quality. We can still have questions about exactly what he is as a receiver and what he is as a player, and I feel like Williams is going to be the same way. Like there's always going to be a Jameson Williams highlight that you're like, wow, this guy's something. But maybe ultimately for the next couple of years, he's just like, I don't know, is he MVS or is he something more?
That is a great question. And maybe we'll find out in the preseason, because we're not going to find out in the first 6 weeks of the regular season. That much we know for sure. All right, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back after the break, we're going to continue our rankings week by highlighting the top 5 best ADPs to exploit and the top 5 worst ADPs to avoid. All right, like I said, it's rankings week, and we're focusing today on the 5 best ADPs. Again, that means like best value, right? Like we want you to draft. These ADPs are the best because, oh man, you want to just go ahead and do it. I tried to make this so convoluted, and Andy's like, hey, idiot, let's make it easy. These are the 5 people we want you to draft.
Specifically, what you attempted to do was like, let's talk about the 5 ADPs that we absolutely nailed that are perfectly correct. And
right.
like,
compelling content.
I don't know how much there is to say about that. Like, wow, we nailed Devontae Adams. He's
right. We should. Hey, Andy, I'm trying to get you out of here in a hurry. Just be like the first 5 picks. We nailed it. Those are the guys. But seriously,
it's fair. It probably would have taken 20 or 30 minutes out of the podcast, but would it have been helpful? I don't know.
Not helpful is definitely the case. So, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to focus on the 5 best ADPs, meaning, again, the best value. These are the guys we want you to draft. And the 5 worst ADPs, meaning these are not good value. We probably want you to go ahead and avoid these players if they're going to stick around these picks for the rest of draft season. As Andy said, we know you best ball sickos out there. We love you. Keep the lights on. We appreciate you. Keep on keeping on, and keep on making football a 365-day event. We know you guys have been drafting. The rest of the folks not going to be drafting for a few weeks. So ADP, it's a little nebulous. So again, we're going to try to, see if these hold for the rest of August. So it's an Andy Behrens podcast. That means that we both compiled secret lists. I have my own top 5 best ADPs. Andy has his own top 5 best ADPs, and we're going to create a joint list. We're going to narrow it down to 5 that we can combine and come to a consensus on. If Andy's going to talk me out of something, talk me into something, or vice versa, I think that's better content than us just rattling off lists at you. But for now, Andy, you rattle off your list of 5 best ADPs.
I actually, I didn't order these necessarily, but if I did, I do have a clear favorite ADP, and it's Aaron Jones. Aaron Jones has finished as an RB1 like in 4 straight seasons, coming off a year with over 1,500 scrimmage yards. And like right now in Yahoo leagues, we're drafting him as like the RB15. That's crazy to me. He has not finished that low. Like he's a better player than that. My next guy, and then I have 4 guys who are like, I think they're all kind of like equally fun values. Terry McLaurin. I don't think I'm going to get a lot of pushback from you on Terry McLaurin. He was last year's wide receiver 14. His situation certainly didn't get worse. And now we're drafting him as the wide receiver 23. It's a little crazy. He's also been, by the way, like an absolute highlight player during camp. He has been the subject of many viral clips, and deservedly so. And then I have a couple running backs here. James Cook was a candidate for this, but I mentioned there's like at least one other guy who's a second-year running back who falls into that RB dead zone. And I think he's super interesting and he could really outperform it. And for me, it's actually Dameon Pierce. I think he has all the characteristics necessary to make a leap like into the position's top 10, top 5, definitely top 10. I think he's one of those guys. Guy finished like 5th among all running backs in missed tackles last year, missed a bunch of games at the end of the season with the ankle injury. Really interesting player. It's going to be a run-focused team. Another running back, much further down the board. This is my one sort of late round guy, Jerick McKinnon. He's the 3rd Chiefs running back off the board in a typical draft, which I think is kind of crazy. He's coming off a year, obviously, in which he scored 10 touchdowns. He was unstoppable, like fantasy wise in the final. He was doing the Damian Williams thing from a few years ago, right? Like he was just a touchdown or 2 every week in like the final 7 weeks of the season. And he's the RB 45 right now. There's not a lot has changed in the Chiefs backfield. I don't know if you've noticed, like he's still back as a favorite of Patrick Mahomes. And then my last guy, because there were several strong candidates at quarterback for this list. And I chose Anthony Richardson. He is the QB 18 in Yahoo drafts right now, which is, at least in terms of basic ADP, I don't know what he is in more recent drafts, but that's pretty wild to me, because in a one quarterback league, you need to be taking shots on guys like this, because there's always going to be, you can always find like a Jared Goff, Kirk Cousins type, those stats on the wire at any moment. Generally in a one quarterback league with like 10 teams, something like that, which is what most people play. So you should be taking big swings on players like Richardson.
We actually surprisingly have no overlap between our 5 best.
Shut up.
Yeah. Pretty wild. And you threw Terry McLaurin out there, and somehow we don't have any overlap. I like a lot of yours, and we'll pick those apart here in just a second, but I'll give you my top 5 best ADPs to exploit. I have a quarterback. It's not Anthony Richardson. It's Daniel Jones, QB 14. I think when you just look at the position right now, there's a whole chunk of, like Dalton and I talked about this on Monday, and we'll keep having this conversation throughout draft season. You really got to decide, are you going to be a Jalen Hurts, Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, Pat Mahomes type? Are you going to take one of those guys early? Or are you going to kind of go in that middle round range? Or are you going to really punt it? And I think if you really punt it, Anthony Richardson is certainly in consideration. I also think Daniel Jones, man, there's a lot of pop about Daniel Jones in Giants camp right now, that he looks great. He looks better than ever. I'm not 100% buying into that, but what I am buying into is like, the offense that the Giants ran last year is not really what Brian Daboll and Mike Kafka want to run. Like if you look at their historical play calling tendencies, and man, if they open it up and do run that type of offense because they have more confidence in Jones and they have more confidence in the receivers around him, he could be like a top 5 fantasy quarterback. So he's one of mine. I looked at consensus ADP, and Derrick Henry is the running back 7. I think I know there's pitfalls with Derrick Henry, but 16th overall, running back 7, I'm going to draft him every time he's in that range. Like if he's going to be in the 16th overall pick, I wanted to put him in this mix because he's an earlier guy. Michael Pittman at wide receiver 35, I think belongs on this list as well. Again, talking to Rich Rebar yesterday about that tier of guys in the receiver landscape. It's your Deontay Johnsons, it's your Chris Godwins, it's Michael Pittman, it's Marquise Brown, DJ Moore, I think fits into this mix too. Like the guys who you can project a pretty solid percentage of targets on their team's offense, but how quality is that offense going to be? And I just think Richardson has a chance to really be great. The RPO research that JJ Zacharyson and Ben Gretsch have done, and the amount of like first read targets that Michael Pittman got last year, I just think he could moonwalk into another massive target share this year. And I think he's very, very good. Like I want to take a shot on a talented player like this. Elijah Moore at wide receiver 54 in consensus ADP. I just think that's way too late. I know he's getting a ton of pop in the offseason proceedings right now, but more importantly, good player, fresh start. And I think the Browns offense could outkick expectations. And last one, Andy, and this is my mega boring one, Tyler Higbee at tight end 15. Gross, not exciting in the least, but I think he's another guy that I had to get a tight end on here somewhere. I don't have a tight end in my worst ADPs either, and I had to have them represented at some point in this discussion. And I don't know, man, like if you're going to totally punt on tight end and try to scrape the value there, Tyler Higbee's, you can project him for a lot of volume. That's it.
I almost had Sam Laporta on my list, but people don't need to hear me talk about Sam Laporta again. He was the closest thing I came to a tight end. I'm really propping up the consensus ranks on Sam Laporta right now. I'm not as I get it with Higbee, and his best games have been pretty good games, and he's definitely in the conversation for one of those guys who could find, I've talked about this before. All you really need to do at tight end, somebody's going to have a 650 yard, 6 or 7 touchdown season. And that's enough to make you a top 6 fantasy tight end. That's where the position has been for a pretty long time. And Higbee is definitely in that club. And he's probably the cheapest of the options too. I don't hate it.
All right. Are there any of mine that you're just no, I'm going to veto these off the top? There's at least one of yours that I want to veto off our ultimate list.
I think Higbee's good as an honorable mention. I wouldn't put him in the 5 best ADPs. I I agree with the point that you're making about Derrick Henry as well, like especially with some uncertainty in terms of holdouts among some of the top running backs right now. Derrick Henry seems like just like that safe place to go, and you're not going to like, I don't know, what is the real scoring difference going to be, but to like a perfectly happy, healthy Jonathan Taylor, if he were in camp right now anyway, like, is he a tier better than Derrick Henry? No, I don't think so. So, I get the point with Derrick Henry. Because he's taken so early, he's so close to where he ought to be anyway that I don't know that I'd consider it a filthy steal. But it is awfully nice, like if you're picking in the middle of round 1 to actually find Derrick Henry in round 2. So I do agree with that, but I don't know that he makes my final 5.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Like, I'm going to probably rank him as the running back 4. And I totally understand the risks that are involved with Derrick Henry, but I think Hopkins helps the offense a lot. And I really just think there's no indication that they're not just going to ride Derrick Henry until the wheels fall off. And maybe the wheels fall off. But again, I don't think there's been a ton of indication that the wheels are about to fall off with Derrick Henry, who was pretty awesome to end last season. Like, there was a moment last season where it's like, oh, is he slowing down? And then they start throwing him the ball and he's averaging like 10 yards a catch. Finally, the Titans start doing that. I've been literally saying to Derrick Henry for like the last 4 years, can you get him to throw you a screen pass? Can you get them to throw you a swing pass out of the backfield? And they finally started doing it. It was awesome. But yeah, you're right. Like, what's the big win if he's taken at running back 7 and he goes and he finishes as running back 4? Whoop-de-doo. So I'm fine vetoing Higbee and Henry off the list. They will not make our 5 finalists. The only one from yours that I'm not in love with, and maybe this doesn't make any sense because I love the player, by the way, but Anthony Richardson at quarterback 18. This one I think is only this good right now. And I think this is only going to be this good for so long because he's going to, as soon as the Colts are like, yeah, he's going to start week 1. I mean, just as a great example in this consensus ADP I'm looking at, like in FFPC drafts, like, the hardcore bros that are throwing a lot of money at this thing, he's going as a 97th overall player. And then over on our platform at Yahoo, he's like 112th. And I'll take the under, meaning he's going to go higher than 97th when he's actually named the starter. So he was the only one I think I was like, I don't know if I love that one just because like it's not going to age well, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I had a big group of quarterback. I wanted to have a quarterback on the list. My whole list could have been quarterbacks, and Daniel Jones was under consideration as well. So I really like that. Like if Jones makes our final 5 here, I think he probably should. But like my group was Daniel Jones, Geno Smith, who we've buried in the ranks and is buried in terms of ADP, and he finishes the QB5 last year, and he gets to throw to Metcalf and Lockett and JSN. like Geno Smith is definitely going to beat his rank, and he's going to beat his ADP. And I don't even know I'm part of the problem too, because I've kind of got him down in the ranks. But like some guys are going to get hurt, some guys are going to underperform, and Geno actually, it's weird because of what our opinion might have been of Geno Smith. Like maybe not yours, certainly mine. 18 months ago was very different from what it is today. But I think he's pretty rock solid. And then Richardson right now, like. Again, if we're basing this, I agree with you that he's gonna climb. It's weird if it's going to come down to like him being officially announced as the starter, because this guy's going to start. And right. I don't know, even in some nightmare scenario where like Gardner Minshew had a start earlier in the year, this has to get to Anthony Richardson pretty soon. Like this is going to be Richardson's team. The whole advantage of having the rookie quarterback on the rookie deal and all that, like you got to get to Richardson quickly, and I'm sure they will. And it'll probably be week 1. I don't think there's a lot of doubt about that. And I guess the other thing with him is that maybe people view him as like a wide range of outcomes player, but I actually think like he's definitely going to run for like, I don't know, 900 yards, something like that. We've discussed this before. He's got a pretty high floor because the rushing stats seem locked in. And I think there's a case to be made that some of this confusion at running back right now is only going to solidify his role as he might lead that team in rushing. He probably is going to lead that team in rushing touchdowns. Like all that's in play. Of all the quarterbacks that I was looking at in terms of Yahoo ADPs right now, he seemed like the best value to me and the most obvious win.
I have a Geno point to make later. So I won't respond to the Geno stuff, but it's interesting. I think that all your points about Richardson are well taken. It's part of why I have Michael Pittman as one of the guys here, and that And again, I know we have questions about Anthony Richardson and how prepared he is and how good is he going to be, right? Like how good is he going to be? Is he going to lift the ceiling of this entire offense? I don't know that he's going to lift the ceiling of this entire offense, but I think he's going to lift the ceiling of Michael Pittman, who I just believe is a really, really, really good player. I think he's been a good player the last 2 years. And again, I mentioned this stat from Fantasy Points Data, which is great. You should check out their data suite and everything. He was 14th last year in percentage of first read targets on the Colts, 31.7%. And if you just look at this list of players, the guys who are ahead of him are all just like, I mean, it's Devontae Adams, it's Cooper Kupp, it's Jamar Chase, Tyreek Hill, Stephon Diggs, like all of the alphas, right? And Pittman is in that group, and I think he's the one guy that you'd be like, oh, he hasn't really hit that type of ceiling yet. But I think it just means he can hit that type of ceiling if he gets the right quarterback play. And it's just the difference between Matt Ryan and Anthony Richardson, even if Richardson is not at his best right away, is just so dramatic. And again, I mentioned JJ Zacharias and Ben Gretsch have done a lot of great work, like looking at even when offenses are run heavy, and even if they have like that rookie quarterback, those RPOs, like just think about an RPO and like what it is. It's a run pass option. You're not going to make it. You're not going to sit there and do the RPO and then like scan the full field, right? You're probably getting it out to your number one read, which as we see is going to be Michael Pittman on like 33% on like, a third of the plays. So I think he's good. I think he's in line for like a monster target share, even if the team is run heavy. And I think the exploitable skill set there with him and Richardson, I think is even better than people think it might be at first blush.
Well, I'm fine with our list having Michael Pittman on it, and then it's kind of a nod to Anthony Richardson as well, and we don't have to have Richardson there. I like Daniel Jones. Again, Daniel Jones was definitely under consideration for me.
Okay, cool. So we'll say Michael Pittman and Daniel Jones make the list for now. We can change our minds, but yeah, it's basically Michael Pittman / Anthony Richardson, because I think those are the two guys right now. I like the Colts a lot, and like I want to draft that offense. Those are the two guys I feel the best like investing in at this point.
I'll also say, like, again, if there's a guy that I just have to usher in to our final five, it's got to be Aaron Jones. I think. Yeah, talk about it. I think this is probably one that corrects as we get deeper into draft season. So maybe it's only like a weird bargain now, but like we're literally drafting him at a spot where I mean he just never finishes. He just never finishes this low, and I think he's well positioned to be sort of a centerpiece player, super friendly option for an inexperienced quarterback. I see no reason why he won't continue to receive exactly the workload that he's had in prior years. He's really efficient. He's obviously a gifted receiver. I would put Aaron Jones among all running backs in the league, certainly top 5 in terms of receiving ability, not just out of the backfield, but like wherever you want to put him on the field. I think he's really, really good. And I also think, I realize I don't have to talk you into Terry McLaurin, but he, for me, is one of those guys. And this would require Sam Howell to play really well. But I'm bullish on Washington, right? I like Bieniemy going there. I like the idea of Sam Howell at least. And I just feel like, we've stacked up some years now where like the most critical, like sort of golden ticket player in fantasy is like a wide receiver who's taken in rounds, 4 through 6 or 4 through 7, somewhere in there. It was Cooper Kupp a couple years ago. It was Stephon Diggs the year before that. And if you're looking for a candidate to break out of this mix and just be like an absolute top of the charts wide receiver, I feel like that could be McLaurin. There's not too many other guys in that range that really leap out to me as like they have the skills to get there. They just need the offensive context. They need the quarterback. They need all that. Like I don't know. I end up with an awful lot of McLaurin. I clearly value him higher than most, maybe everybody except for you. I don't know. I get a lot of McLaurin. I just see him as like a really strong candidate to be one of those decisive players of 2023.
Wave him through, dude. I mean, wave Terry McLaurin through. You don't have to convince me. Again, like wide receiver 23, 24 on the consensus list that I'm looking at here. And like when I sit down and rank receivers, obviously the top 10 guys go, I think you got to rank ahead of him. I think you got to rank Chris Olave, Jalen Waddle, Calvin Ridley, Devontae Smith, Amari Cooper, DK Metcalf. And then that's kind of it. Like the guys that I think are decisively ahead of Terry, and even Metcalf, I can hear the argument. Even Cooper, I could hear the argument. Like,
Yeah, I was about to make the argument with both Cooper and Metcalf. Like, I think that's really close.
Right. Yeah. So actually, no, I think that there's just like there's a break there. And then it's just guys that, I mean, I get that Sam Howell's an unknown, but I think Deshaun Watson is kind of an unknown at this point, right? I mean, there's certainly a really high ceiling there, and that's present. But again, I think that's, look, we're wasting time arguing, like saying why Terry McLaurin. I agree with you that Terry McLaurin should be on this list. And I think Aaron Jones is pretty close to me. So it comes down for our final spot here between Elijah Moore, wide receiver 54, and then Dameon Pierce, running back 18, and Jerick McKinnon, running back 45. I think it's between Elijah Moore and Dameon Pierce to me for our final spot. Tell me where and because again, in the ADP source I have right now, he's running back 18 in consensus ADP, which I think is kind of fair-ish, but I'm also open to you telling me like he should actually be up there with like Ramondre Stevenson and Travis Etienne and Najee Harris, who I have, like a whole tier higher than him right now.
Yeah, we just mentioned a player who's actually going to be on my worst ADPs list. Like, I think, first of all, I think, pure runner, and maybe this is a weakness of mine. I love guys who are stylistically like Dameon Pierce. I love these. I don't know that this is somebody who has a 10-year career necessarily, but I love the physicality of this guy. I love that so many of his yards after contact were just him, carrying dudes downfield. Love the running style. It is clearly an offense that is going to be pretty heavily run focused this year. They obviously love him. Again, whether you want to talk about like the sort of under the hood advanced stats, whether you just want to talk eye test. I mean, I thought he was just a joy to watch last year. Yep, and had he actually been healthy to finish the season, he's probably the missed tackle leader in the league. Really, really fun. And he's not going to catch 70 balls. I don't think that's going to happen. Like, I don't think there's this like absolute, stellar receiving upside out there, but he's also not a zero as a receiver. So that we don't have to worry about him like catching, a dozen passes over the course of the year. I just think he's going to be a heavily featured player in a team that clearly wants to run. I don't want to make too much of they're going to be, this is going to be the Niners run game. Like, the Niners have the Niners run game, and there are some other teams out there that are trying. I don't want to tell that story necessarily, but I think he pretty clearly has a chance to finish as like a top 8-ish fantasy running back. I think that's probably his ceiling. And so there's a lot of profit available here.
All right. Just gut call. You'd rather have Moore or Pierce as our final spot?
I actually think it is, Moore is a really good name. And I like the part of the reason that I included McKinnon in my list is I just wanted somebody from like way down the ranks. So I'm good having Elijah Moore here because I want somebody who's like really buried. We should have a few more gems here. Like, we're talking about a bunch of guys who are like early round, not even mid round picks, right? Like, these are guys going pretty early in the draft one way or another. And I love having somebody like Moore who you can actually get in the back half of a draft.
All right, perfect. Then we'll wave him through. That is our 5 best ADPs, the ones to exploit right now. It's Michael Pittman, wide receiver 35 / Anthony Richardson at like quarterback 18. It's Daniel Jones at quarterback 14. It's Terry McLaurin at wide receiver 23, 24. No pushback there. It's Aaron Jones as running back 15, 16-ish. And then Elijah Moore deep down the draft, like sub wide receiver 50 type. So we love those 5. Let's get negative here, Andy. I'll tell you about my top 5 worst. I tried to avoid picking like guys that are going super late and being like, I don't like that one. I actually tried to keep it like, guys that are going, maybe again, not the first round guys, second round guys, anything like that, but certainly like you need to make some calls about these guys in the middle range. So you hit me with your top 5 worst ADPs first.
I'm going to start with one that if I had to rank these, this would be 5th because I expect it to change. I don't think this is going to hold. But right now, in Yahoo drafts to this point, Breece Hall has gone as the RB12. I can't really endorse that. He's still not practicing coming off injury. That's not like that's to be expected. That's not a crazy story, but like he's still like 2 or 3 weeks from returning to practice. The Jets and Dalvin Cook are just circling each other, and that is going to be an enormous problem for Breece Hall. And so you can't draft him as an RB1 if there's a really, really good chance that he's just not going to get the volume to support that. I also put Ramondre Stevenson on my list, and this is somewhat difficult for me because I really like the player. I've got a couple of dynasty teams that where Ramondre is just an absolutely key piece. I just think at RB, he's going right around RB 10 right now.
Yep.
Again, really like the player, like the receiving ability. He was super efficient. The Patriots are trying out everybody. Everybody is coming in to try out to perhaps take a share of the rushing workload in New England. They are screaming at us that it is not just going to be Ramondre Stevenson, right? Like when they had Davian Harris was healthy, he had a big role in that offense. So like if part of your reason for drafting Ramondre at RB10 is like, well, who else do they have? Well, don't worry. They're going to have somebody else. And that's going to be a problem. So he makes my list. I feel terrible about it, but he makes my list. I also here's another guy that I've been really loyal to over the years. I also put Keenan Allen on my list. Part of the reason that I have Keenan here is because like he's going ahead of Terry McLaurin and some guys that I just want a little bit more. Keenan goes at wide receiver 18, which, second half of the season last year, he was great. Peak Keenan Allen was just like, you could lock it in. It was 100 catches. It was 1,100 yards. It was 6 touchdowns. And that's really good. That makes you like a PPR Hall of Famer. But it is also like the ceiling for 31-year-old Keenan Allen. I don't think he necessarily gets there. And it's, again, we're drafting him in the same spot where like we're taking guys that I think can be absolute like supernova stars. And so I'm never going to take him over McLaurin is basically where I'm at. If you want a Keenan Allen type receiving line, I think you can probably get it 30 picks later with like Chris Godwin. I think there are other guys out there that can provide it. I got 2 more for you. One of them, probably the biggest name on my list, fantasy wise, Mark Andrews. And I like, this is a great player.
Ooh.
I have no, like, if you get Mark Andrews, like at the end of I don't know, if I could just get Mark Andrews as like a 4th rounder or a super late 3rd rounder, and he was going in the range of like the other tight ends that I have in this tier, I would feel okay about it. I will grant you that he is the one tight end in the last 7 years who has actually knocked Travis Kelce briefly off the perch as the tight end 1. So his ceiling is great. I just think that the edge to be gained at tight end in drafts is the difference between the number 1 guy and everybody else. It is not the difference between the number 2 guy and anybody else. I don't think there's a lot separating Mark Andrews from George Kittle, from TJ Hawkinson, from the potential of Kyle Pitts, from some others. I think the separation is between Kelce and the field. And so like, if you're drafting Mark Andrews, like end of the 2nd round, early in the 3rd round, to me, that's just too early given the other tight end options out there. And my 5th guy, is Dak Prescott. He goes as the QB9. I mean, first of all, he's coming off a poor season, right? He led the NFL in interceptions in a year in which he played 12 games. That's not great. This team screaming at us, like Mike McCarthy literally telling us they don't want to have the number 1 offense in the NFL. Mike McCarthy literally telling us that they want to help the defense stay fresh. They want to win the ball by running, and we're going to defend. We're going to hold you to 15 points or whatever. And like they're telling you that they don't want Dak Prescott to be a 5,000-yard passer. I don't think it's going to happen. And he goes ahead of a whole bunch of guys who I would project for basically the same numbers.
We actually have, your list is great, by the way, really, really good. We have what I'm going to call 1.5 same names here. We have our one overlap name is unfortunately, and I hate to do it too, but it is Keenan Allen, wide receiver 18-19. And it's pretty simple. You said it perfectly that if you want to get a Keenan Allen stat line, I think he is very similar to Chris Godwin, to Michael Pittman, who we talked about, Deontay Johnson. And those guys go much later. And look, the bottom line is, and I love Keenan Allen, but the player who Keenan Allen is right now, if he has the box scores that he did last year, which people are really holding on to, that offense is going to suck again. So, and that's just
Yeah.
It's just the facts. Like that if they can't push the ball downfield like everybody wants them to, they want to push it right now. They want to push. You want Justin Herbert throwing the ball down the field. Keenan Allen can't have like 140 targets, which is what he's going to need to have, I think, to be like wide receiver 18, 19 at this point in his career. It just is what it is. And, you know, obviously I think there were pretty serious signs of decline last year in terms of beating press man coverage from Keenan Allen. So sucks, but we've got to wave him through because we both have him on the list. And my one that I said is like kind of the half. I have Dak Prescott, Tua, and Kirk as quarterback 10 to 12 are all bad ADPs to me because again, it's just pretty simple. If you're gonna take those, like if you're gonna take that tier of quarterbacks, wait until just wait to get Aaron Rodgers at that point. Wait to get Geno Smith, Jared Goff. This was my Geno Smith point. Like, what's the difference between Dak, Tua, and Kirk than Geno Smith, Jared Goff, like those guys who. And I got my questions about those guys, but I have my questions about Dak, Tua, and Kirk Cousins. Kirk Cousins, like I think Kirk might be my favorite of those guys, and he goes at QB 12. But are they going to have the same type of offense as they did last year? There's questions there. Dak, as you mentioned, he could have a season where he finishes at the QB 15 in fantasy, and it's actually really good for the Dallas Cowboys because they run the ball well, and their defense is much better and is like a top 5 unit. So it can be great for Dallas, and he's just not the fantasy guy. So I think we go ahead and say we would just move Dak Prescott in because I think he kind of encapsulates the same thing as Tua and Kirk, that just wait till like 10 picks later to take Aaron Rodgers. I think I'm going to rank Daniel Jones ahead of these guys. God forgive me. I think I'm going to rank Anthony Richardson ahead of these guys. And again, there's just really not a big difference between Dak Prescott and Geno Smith, who goes at QB 16. Andy, I'm not one of the I got Geno at QB like 10 right now. I mean, once I adjust my rankings today, I've had him at 12. He's going to be 10. He's going to be ahead of Dak and all these guys because I just think that offense is set up to fly this year, man.
Yeah. And again, he's got like a little bit of rushing ability there. So you're not, it's not like you're totally not getting a dual threat guy. The other point to make about Dak is that since the ankle injury, he hasn't really run. Nope. So like if you're still hanging on to the idea of Dak Prescott as the guy who was, 6 rushing touchdowns a year and a goal line threat early in his career, it has not been the case since the injury. So I think that's out the window as well. I just think he's a good representative for this whole group. Like I agree with you. If you're going to wait for this tier, you should just take a swing with like one of the rushing quarterbacks with real passing upside and not really bother. Like this Dak Prescott at like QB9 thing just sort of reeks of you got caught in a position run and you wanted to take the next name, and that's why he's QB9. But like I don't think there's anything in the profile that means he deserves to actually go there.
Okay, next, my other 3 guys here. I have J.K. Dobbins at running back 20. There's kind of a lot of guys that, and we'll come back to Ramondre Stevenson because he's a really interesting one, but like the next tier after where Stevenson goes, there's a lot of guys I find really interesting. I find Alexander Mattison really interesting, Aaron Jones, who we talked about, Miles Sanders, Jahmyr Gibbs, Kenneth Walker, Dameon Pierce, and like J.K. Dobbins, I think it's just the one guy in that group that I'm not going to click on. And it's really no fault to his own because at his peak, he's actually a really fantastic runner and a really efficient runner. But similar to the Damian Harris thing we talked about with Josh Allen at the top of the show, he's probably never going to get the bulk of the goal line carries because Lamar can pop a few in himself. Not quite the same way that Josh Allen can, but he's going to own some of that. And there's just no way, they're throwing to their running backs. It's just not going to happen with that receiver room with Mark Andrews and Lamar Jackson's scrambling ability. So between the 20s back who doesn't catch passes is pretty much a no-go in the top 20 running backs to me. So he's on my list. DeAndre Swift, we briefly talked about. No, thanks. I mean, I'm not taking DeAndre Swift at running back 27. I'm interested in taking him well beyond that because I want to take an Eagles back, but it's got to be like 36. It's going to be like 10 positional spots later than that because there's just a chance he's only a passing down threat. And there's been some talk out of that at Eagles camp that he's really only working in the passing game. I get Rashad Penny has injury concerns. DeAndre Swift has injury concerns, but I'd just straight up rather have Rashad Penny than DeAndre Swift. Dalton is doing a dance somewhere in his living room listening to this podcast right now. So, I just really think there's not even that big of a gap between DeAndre Swift and Kenneth Gainwell. And like ADP would not tell you that that's the case. And my last guy here is Jerry Jeudy at wide receiver 23, who I've talked about way too much. And I honestly, if we don't want to wave him through, that's fine. People know my thoughts on Jerry Jeudy. They don't need to hear more about it, but Jerry Jeudy, wide receiver 23 is too high for me. So I've got him, again, kind of finalizing my tiers right now. I've got him after the tier of players we talked about, like the compilers that just need a quarterback to break right. I think a lot more things have to break right for Jerry Jeudy. So I'm fine if we don't want to include him in the top 5, but I did have to mention him here.
I don't have a problem including Jeudy in the top 5. I literally only didn't put him on my list because I know he's been so thoroughly discussed on the podcast, but I think there's a clear case for it. I mean, we are reaching a point where there's always somebody in a draft who is a huge Jeudy zealot, willing to take him early. It's just he's not done it. He's had a lot of opportunities to do it and he's not done it. And I think the offense as a whole is just a big, wonderful question mark. I'm anxious to see what the Sean Payton, Russell Wilson experience looks like, but I don't know. I'm not sure that it's going to produce a starting quality every week fantasy receiver. And there's always somebody who thinks that Jerry Jeudy is that guy. So I don't have a problem waving him through. I actually think I should have had DeAndre Swift on my list. I want to wave him through. I almost want a redo on because I think the Breece Hall ADP is going to correct a little bit, and I'm perfectly happy waving DeAndre Swift through because I would take James Cook ahead of DeAndre Swift every time. You're telling me that doesn't happen, then I want DeAndre Swift on my list here.
Andy's just like seeding me 2 guys here. He's trying. Andy's trying to get out of here. He's trying to get out of this podcast, which is fair enough. but seriously, yeah, I think just last thing on the Jeudy stuff. You don't have to agree with my view on Jerry Jeudy as the player. Like, you can believe all the yards per route run and the points per game stuff from last year in the final 6 weeks and yada, yada, yada. You can be in on Jerry Jeudy as that player, and his ADP can still be too high because, as you mentioned, this ADP is saying like the Sean Payton, Russell Wilson thing is going to work out. And
yeah,
this is just not a certainty. It is not a certainty that is the case. I know Nathaniel Hackett was not a good coach last year. Sean Payton has let you know that he thinks Nathaniel Hackett was not a good coach last year. But go back and watch the freaking games. Like, Russ was a problem last year. The receivers were a problem last year. And like Courtland Sutton, I know you all hate him because you people last year overdrafted him. You people did that. He still exists. He still exists, and he's probably going to get 100 targets this year. I hate to tell you.
Yeah. By the way, if you do go back and watch a Broncos game last year, make sure it's the Nickelodeon broadcast of Rams Broncos. It's the single greatest broadcast I've ever seen. Patrick Starr's commentary on Russell Wilson, unrivaled. Yep.
Okay. So, all right. So we just need one more spot here. We've got from your list. I disagree with you a little bit on Breece Hall, and I don't want to wave him through just because, like, I really think Dalvin Cook is like, see how close I am to signing with the Jets? Miami, please, 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 please sign me. That's actually what I think is going on here. And if Dalvin Cook is not there, then I think he's really gonna. I think Breece Hall at running back 10 is perfectly plausible. I'm kind of cool saying like J.K. Dobbins, whatever. I'm fine leaving him not on the list. So between Mark Andrews at tight end 2 is really spicy, bro. And I don't hate you for putting it out here because part of the thing you always hear when like talking about because I talk about the Ravens receivers a ton, like I want to draft Beckham, Bateman, and Flowers. The first response you get is, well, Mark Andrews is the number 1 receiver. He's always been Lamar Jackson's guy. It's like, yeah, I get it. Mark Andrews is really good. I love Mark Andrews as a player, and he has always been Lamar Jackson's guy. When the other guys around him were like Demarcus Robinson and Devin Duvernay and Sammy freaking Watkins. So there's a chance that Mark Andrews there's just a chance he finishes second on the team in targets, which is going to really bang you if you take him at tight end 2. But Stevenson is a really interesting one to me. So talk to me about those 2 guys. And I think one of those 2 is going to be on our final list here.
Yeah, well, this is the this is really the point on Mark Andrews. You just made it. That receiving hierarchy still has to sort itself out, but there's a lot of names that we're super interested in. It's like what the Ravens passing offense generally is going to look like. Big open question, big open fun question. But again, that one just comes down to me feeling like you're not getting the big edge at tight end because you took the number 2 tight end. You get the big edge from taking Travis Kelce, and like Kelce is the guy who's been the number 1 tight end in 6 of the last 7 years, right? And again, Andrews was the one to dethrone him. I just don't think, like, even looking at every other season of Andrews' career, it's not like he distinguishes himself from like the tight end 6, the tight end 7 by such a significant margin that I want to take an early reach. So I just haven't been able to do it. I get it in a tight end premium league. I don't get it anywhere else. I don't think he should be like a top 30 fantasy pick. And then the situation with Ramondre is, I hope that if you're drafting him as like the RB10, RB12, you're doing it because you just think I think he's a phenomenal, versatile player, wonderful receiver, efficient runner, all that. Like, I think he's a great player. They're clearly going to add somebody. They're screaming at you that they're going to add somebody. They're trying them all out. They brought in Fournette. They brought in Zeke. Like, they're either going to sign somebody or they're going to decide that somebody who's already on the roster needs to see, a dozen touches per game. I don't think they like the way the season ended for Ramondre last year. Like, I just think he's going to run in tandem with somebody. I'm sure he's going to be the head of the committee. He's a really good player. I love him. I just don't think that like an argument for Ramondre Stevenson cannot begin with who else do they have? Because again, they're going to have somebody else.
Even Ramondre Stevenson himself didn't like the way last season ended for him. This is in December 2022. I'd say I'm feeling it. Stevenson said after Thursday's practice in Foxborough, I feel what everybody talks about with the NFL season, but I feel like I'm doing a good job taking care of my body. I'm just staying positive, more proactive than anything. But yeah, I'm feeling the season for sure. Just talked about being worn down, a ton. Looking fresher, like it just, I think that's part of this whole thing too, that Stevenson kind of getting worn down himself last year, not being as explosive has been a talking point from the team. It's been a talking point from the player. And I'm kind of tempted to wait just because I'm scared Mark Andrews can catch like 13 touchdowns and we look like idiots. I'm tempted to say Stevenson is our last pick here. Also just because I think he encapsulates this group at running back right now, where typically we've talked about the dead zone being running backs 17 to like 23 as the guys we don't want to draft. But Andy, I'm not sure there's a big difference between Ramondre Stevenson plus like Leonard Fournette and Ezekiel Elliott, because that's what's going to happen. So just think about him in that sense. Is there a big difference between like the group of Ramondre Stevenson and Najee Harris and Travis Etienne and Joe Mixon, who are the 25th to 35th overall pick in consensus ADP, like ranging somewhere between there? Is there a big difference between those guys and Damian Pierce at 49, Miles Sanders at 52, Alexander Madison at 57, Cam Akers at 58, James Conner? I mean, God, James Conner at 62. Like, I just don't know that, like, there's questions about all those players, everybody I just listed, but that includes those running backs at the top. And I think Stevenson is kind of the most glaring example right now of a guy who is going to fall.
Yeah, this is why I included him here, is because he's just of the running backs where I really start to have questions, and I think there are glaring questions. He's at the top in terms of ADP. And again, it's not injury, it's not any kind of worry about that. I just feel like again, part of what is propping up that ADP right now is this idea that he's the only show in town, and I just that is clearly not going to be the case.
All right, so I think our 5 ultimate list of 5 worst ADPs. God, it's so sad. But Keenan Allen at wide receiver 18, our one like clear-cut consensus guy. Dak Prescott at quarterback 9, Jerry Jeudy at wide receiver 23, DeAndre Swift at running back 27, and Ramondre Stevenson at running back 10. There's like that list is sandwiched by 2 guys I really like in Keenan Allen and Ramondre Stevenson as players. So that stinks. 3 guys in the middle, whatever. man, the Judy bros are going to come for my head if I'm wrong about this year. And if like Russell Wilson is peak Russell Wilson, I'm going to be screwed, but I don't think that's going to happen. Yeah. So Cortland Sutton's getting 110 targets, whether you like it or not. It just is going to happen. I hate to tell you that. I'm not even I'm not a Cortland Sutton guy, but that is just going to happen. So that's our list, Andy. How do we feel about it?
I will repeat that I feel terrible putting Keenan Allen on it.
Sucks.
But the ADP really did stand out to me because I was, I used to always remind people, like people for a while, fantasy managers had this notion of Keenan Allen based on, his like really early in his career, there were some injuries that we had to worry about, and that just dogged him, in his peak years. But his peak years were just, flawless and like a metronome. Again, 100 catches, 1,100 yards, 6 touchdowns. That's just what he did. And that's an awesome fantasy season. And you were able to draft that while half the people in your league were thinking, oh, he's going to get injured. There's, I don't want that guy. Like he was a really nice value, and he's been a terrific player, terrific pro. But I thought you made a great point on Allen, where like, if those numbers repeat, it's because it looks a little bit too much like it did last year, which can't be the case for that offense moving forward.
All right, that's all we got. That's the show. I hope these lists age well, buddy. Because listen,
how about it?
Yeah. It's a shame. It's a shame about the Keenan Allen thing, but alas, time comes for us all, and time has come for us on this episode. So that's going to do it for this edition of the show. But be sure to check out our podcast tomorrow. Fantasy Points Scott Barrett joins me to wrap up Rankings Week here. We're going to highlight the hardest players to rank and project their outcomes for the 2023 season. Until then, we're out.